There's this story that is attributed to the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, where he woke up from a dream that he was a butterfly. But then he thought about it and he said this: am I a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or am I a butterfly who's dreaming it's a man? Anybody who has watched Christopher Nolan's film Inception can probably appreciate that dilemma. How do you know that you're awake rather than sleeping? Well, this experience actually really hit me a little while ago, just a few weeks ago. I had a dream in which I was looking at my motorcycle. But in the dream, I noticed that the paint job on my motorcycle was different than I remembered it. And I said, okay, that must be evidence that I'm dreaming, because I don't recall changing the paint design on my motorcycle. But then I thought this: okay, I'm going to test this. Typically, dreams have a sort of fast, blurring warp and woof to them. They lack detail, at least in my experience. They're kind of just moving on to the next thing always. There's an impermanence about the experience of the dream. So I said, in order to make sure that I'm dreaming, I'm going to listen and be very attentive to my environment in this moment. And so I closely studied the paint on the motorcycle. And I looked very closely at the details of the paint, and I leaned in and looked at it, and it looked very much like real paint. And I carefully listened to my environment, and suddenly I realized there was music softly playing in the background. And I felt, I kind of moved like this, and I felt the clothing on my back, and I could feel the warmth of the air in the room that I was in where my motorcycle was parked. And based upon all that close attention to sense perceptual experience, which didn't seem impermanent at all, it seemed very stable and clear, I concluded that I was, in fact, awake. Moments later, I woke from the dream. And that has stuck with me. This thought that you could be sleeping even when you think you're awake. Now, that's part of a deep philosophical conundrum. How do you know that there is an external world to your mind that you are experiencing? The dream dilemma is one way that this question has been posed. It's been posed in many other ways as well. For example, how do you know that you're not a brain in a vat? A brain that is being stimulated by various nutrients and electrical charges that are creating this illusion of a sense perceptual world around you. Or to take another version of that story, how do you know that you're not in a matrix, a computer generated matrix that is creating the world that you perceive, just like Neo realizes in the film The Matrix? Here's another version. How do you know that you're not being deceived by an evil demon? A demon that is allowing you to think that white is black and black is white, that 2 + 2 = 4, when in fact it equals 5. How do you know that that demon isn't leading you to think, in fact, you are awake when you are asleep, or that you are, in fact, a human being when you are really a butterfly or something else? Those dilemmas place us into what has sometimes been called the Cartesian Circle. This question that if you need to have certainty of something, you will never be able to get out of this skeptical dilemma. You can never be sure 100% that you're awake rather than dreaming, or that you're not a brain in a vat, or a person in a computer generated matrix, or that you're not being deceived by an evil demon. Some people then respond to the Cartesian circle by lapsing into skepticism. They conclude, okay, perhaps we really can't know anything about the world at all. That doesn't seem to me to be a very reasonable response. I would submit a more reasonable response is to recognize that even at the most basic dictates of our encounter with reality, of our experience of reality, it is always based on a disposition of faith, of trust, of committing to something like the external world that we experience, while knowing we could be wrong. believing that in fact I am awake, that there is that external world, that I'm not a brain in a vat or in a matrix, that I'm not being deceived by an evil demon. What that tells us is that the most fundamental, rational response to reality is a response that begins in faith. It begins in trust. So when I hear people pitting faith and reason against one another, I want to say that is the classic example of a false dichotomy. Indeed, reason is part of faith. I like to put it like this: the person who says, I exercise reason, not faith, is like the person who says, I breathe air, not oxygen. Of course, oxygen is a key element, indeed, the key element in air. And faith is an element, indeed, the key element in reason.